The story begins with Bisher Van, also known as the Hound of Baskerville, being falsely accused and then marched towards the gallows where he was promptly executed. And as the blade descended, Bisher's final thoughts were of just how pathetic his life was. And if only he had a chance at another life, he swore to himself that he wouldn't live the life of a dog that was dispatched after the hunt was over. And then suddenly he opens his eyes to find himself in an unfamiliar place surrounded by infants. And for a moment he was shocked, especially after his body felt heavy and weak, making him think that he was in hell. But then Hugo, the head of the Baskervilles clan, starts walking around the infirmary with contempt in his eyes, scoffing at the noisy little creatures, until the young Bisher caught his eyes, making him think maybe not all of them are annoying. Hugo then ordered his servants to move the younglings to the Cradle of Swords, all while Bisher was staring daggers at him, as he was the one who framed him in his past life. And seeing such a young version of his boss, Bisher realized that God himself had smiled upon him and granted his death wish. He then swears to himself that from now on, he will be living life at his own accord. Flashbacks show that Bisher was born as the illegitimate child of Hugo. He was then trained his entire life to be a ruthless and unfeeling hound. Assassinations, espionage, and blackmail, where all parts of his daily life and everything was for the sake of making the Baskerville clan the greatest out of the 7 clans. And the reason for his undying loyalty was a need for Hugo and the clan's acknowledgement. Well, at least until the gate separating their world from the demon world was breached, igniting a long and brutal war against demonkind. And after 10 long years, humanity won. And as a reward for his loyalty, he was sentenced to the sword like a dog after the hunt is over. And the only reason he was executed was because he ended up learning a bit too much about his clan and the world at large. But for now, Bisher chooses to bid his time and get as strong as possible to take revenge on his father Hugo and the clan at large. The next day, Bisher finds himself in a sea of rusty swords, also known as the Cradle of Swords, which is the first trial all younglings of the Baskerville clan must pass. And to do so, Bisher must carve a path straight towards the legendary Styx River that grants children superhuman powers. Bisher remembers that in his past life he was pushed aside by his siblings and couldn't get the blessing, but this time he carved a path straight through the jungle of swords, getting all injured and cut, and was the first to make it to the river. And as soon as he plunged himself in the water, his wounds started healing. His skin grew tougher, and in return he suffered immense pain. But nonetheless, he endured the godly amount of pain for 7 minutes until he passed out. But surprisingly, Hugo plucked him out and announced with a smile that a very greedy son has been born. This sent Bisher into a frenzy, promising that when the time comes, he will wipe that smirk alongside the entire clan off the face of the earth. Later that night, Bisher wakes up to find himself in the infirmary. This made him ecstatic as he had successfully passed the first trial. But just then, a nanny holding a box comes and places it in his bed. This seemed to confuse him until 2 scarlet mambas sprung out and charged at him. Bisher realized that this must be the work of a madam in the clan who was trying to weed out the competition for her son. But nonetheless, he caught the 2 mambas by the throat and ripped them apart with his bare hands. And later that night, Bisher has a dream about his past life, as by the age of 8, he possessed talents that were considered extraordinary to normal people. But within the clan, they were average. And by age 20, he had completed many difficult missions for the clan, including assassinations, espionage, and so much more. And when he reached age 29, he fell behind his comrades and felt like he hit the wall in terms of skills. And by age 30, the demon gate was breached, forcing him to go to war and slay countless demons. And finally, by age 39, humanity finally won the war, but his reward for his undying loyalty was death. And when day rolled by, the nannies were stunned after finding him snoozing surrounded by what was left of the snakes. And later that same day, the nannies responsible for guarding the children were interrogated and then dispatched for their failure. But in the end, nothing came up, as the only one who saw what happened was Bisher. Skip forward 8 years, and while at class, their teacher tells them about the stages of swordsmanship. First of all, if they cannot imbue mana in their sword, then they're a sword beginner. And once they can imbue a little amount of mana in their sword, then they're a sword expert. And when the mana starts to flow outwards in an aura, then they're a sword graduate. And finally, once the aura becomes solid and changes form based on the wielder's will, then they become a sword master. Hearing this, Bisher gets lost in thought as he remembers by now Hugo is already a sword master. This seemed to catch the teacher's eye, who internally praises Bisher for his extraordinary talent, stating that the master will be pleased with this student. But unfortunately, the only thing that was on Bisher's mind in that moment was how long will it take him to end Hugo. But thanks to his talent, Bisher had a lot of fans and also enemies, including his classmates, who regularly bullied, beat, and called him a half-breed as he's supposedly an illegitimate son. But after taking a good look at them, Bisher remembers them as the three twins who falsely accused him and then stabbed him when he tried to escape. Looking at them, he wonders if he should just take them out now, as in 10 years they will grow up to be a thorn in his side. Especially after the oldest of them pulls out a knife and starts acting all mighty and powerful, as the three of them don't really believe the rumors of him spending 7 minutes in the Styx River. The oldest one then gets the idea to stab him to see if the rumors are actually true. As if one spends more than a minute in the mystical waters, their skin turns as solid as steel. But first he chooses to choke him, saying that if he can even spend 3 minutes holding his breath, he'd eat his hand in front of him. And sure enough, 1 minute, then 3, then 5, and finally 10 minutes passes, and to their shock, Bisher was still just standing there, making them almost believe that the legends were true. And having enough, Bisher bites down on the bully's hand and actually takes off one of his fingers. This seemed to really scare the hell out of the three. Bisher then coldly tells him that he promised he'd eat his hand if he could last for 3 minutes, and that he's just helping him fulfill his promise. And having enough, the three tried to leave to get their brother's finger reattached, but Bisher tells them that he didn't give them permission to leave yet. This sent the younger one into a frenzy, making him pick up the knife and try to stab Bisher. But to his shock, the knife couldn't penetrate his skin. Bisher then twisted the brat's hand and asked him if he's sure about what he just did. And realizing the rumors were true a bit too late, Bisher delivered a soul-crushing punch to his face. He then moved on to the second brother and sniped his face with a powerful kick. After laying everyone on the floor, Bisher tells them to not be scared and that they're supposed to get all healed up soon. But actually, Bisher picks up the knife and tells them that he doesn't really have any intentions of letting all of them go. In fact, he's willing to spare the life of only one of them just before he tosses them the knife and tells them that he'll even give them the honor of picking who will survive just before telling them to make it quick, as he doesn't really like waiting. The three brothers then look at each other with horror in their eyes and then start fighting each other over who will survive, all while Bisher was just standing at the door grinning, because with this, the three legendary twins are no more. Meanwhile, at Hugo's office, the butler John informs him about a recent skirmish at the Ruby Mine with the Morgue clan, all because they're claiming that the mine is in their territory. But Hugo tells him to not worry because they will reach out to them soon to discuss the situation, and asks if he has anything else to say. Hearing this, John tells him that Bisher has scored first in their recent written exam, and that the practical one is going to be held in 5 days. Hearing this, Hugo is impressed, but John tells him that recently a big fight broke out between the young masters. Hugo asks him how many died, but John tells him that fortunately no one died. He further tells him that the three twins suffered a lot of damage as the younger one got his teeth destroyed, the middle brother got his jaw caved in, and the older one got his finger cut off. But fortunately, they received treatment in time and have recovered. But as a result, they've suffered a lot of mental damage, and as of now, they're on bad terms with each other. Hearing this, Hugo is surprised because they're close brothers, and he didn't expect them to hurt each other like this. But John tells him that they didn't pick a fight with each other, rather they started it with another student, and to be precise, it was Bisher. Hearing this, he was very surprised, so he summoned him to have a word. After arriving, Bisher greets Hugo and acts all bubbly and innocent until Hugo cuts to the chase and asks him about his 3 older brothers he recently crippled. Hearing this, Bisher tells him that he heard they got medical attention and are doing just fine now. But Hugo cuts him off as he was talking about their hearts, not their bodies. He further states that they've just been here before he arrived and have gracefully forgiven him. Hearing this, Bisher just smiles and says nothing, but Hugo further states the 3 of them are his brothers, and their fighting style was a piece of art. But now the 3 of them can't look each other in the eyes, let alone speak to one another, thanks to what he did to them. He then asks Bisher again if he really doesn't feel guilty about what he did to them, to which Bisher menacingly responded that he's simply stronger than them, and that how could someone who's stronger make a mistake? But all this time, Bisher was thinking about an incident that happened in his last life, a lone survivor of a clan that had been destroyed by the Baskervilles, who later became a nun, had personally came to Hugo and forgave him for what he did to her family. And at that moment, Bisher tells Hugo the exact words he told the nun, about how he believes forgiveness is nothing more than a sorry excuse for the weak who can't take revenge. Hearing this, Hugo is ecstatic that someone finally shares his way of thinking. He then tells him that he's right, power is justice. And as a reward, he orders his butler to take him to the kitchen for him to pick out whatever snacks he could fit in his hands. Hearing this, Bisher is ecstatic as he pretends that he wants to eat chocolate. And on his way out, Hugo calls him son and tells him to destroy his enemies in the practical exam, especially his brothers from the main family, as he is basically from the outer family thanks to him being a bastard child. This made Bisher grit his teeth in anger before leaving. And at the kitchen, the head chefs present him with the most exquisite and gourmet chocolate they have, but he refused, telling them that he doesn't want something that's processed, and then asks them for the strongest cacao beans they have. This seemed to really confuse them, but nonetheless, John hands him a sachet of bloody beans, which are the most potent cacao beans in the world, as one bean is capable of making 100 kg of chocolate. And it turns out that Bisher doesn't really give a flip about chocolate, but in reality, he was going to use the cacao beans for a very specific reason in the upcoming physical exam. And as the exam day rolls in, all the young masters gather at the Black Grounds, a mountain filled with demonic creatures shepherded and picked out by the clan. The instructor then explains that their task is to survive 1 full month in this hellish land, and states that they will be ranked based on how many points they score. So for example, defeating a demonic being will net you 70 points. Saving someone from death will earn you 30 points. Eliminating another young master will net you 50 points. And in addition, he strongly advised them to not leave the exam grounds, as they're uncharted and unexplored and are almost guaranteed to be infested with A-ranked demonic beings. Bisher starts reminiscing about this place as the other students notice him, especially the 3 twins. The instructor then prays for their success and announces the start of the exam. And while everyone dashes towards strategic spots, Bisher simply rushes towards the edge of the exam grounds and just chills there, much to the dismay of his watchdog, who expected more of him thanks to the rumors. And as the days roll by, all that Bisher did was hunt for food, build shelter, and dig holes for some reason, which really annoyed the hell out of his watchdog, who now believed that the rumors were wrong and that Bisher is just a coward. He then leaves, as he thought that his time is better spent watching over the other contestants. And to be fair, this is exactly what Bisher wanted. And after verifying that his watchdog has left, Bisher finally made his move by leaving the exam space and entering the uncharted zone, declaring that the hunt is finally beginning. And upon exploring for a bit, he notices the smell of burnt wood and stumbles upon literal burning dookie. Seeing this verified his hunch, as the only creature that produces it is a hellhound. And sure enough, just as he said that, one showed up. Bisher states that he sure got sick of them in his scouting days, but it's nice seeing one as it brings back so much terrible memories. And for a second, Bisher hesitates, as he doesn't really know if his 8-year-old body can handle a fight with such a powerful, demonic creature. But nonetheless, he charges at it as he has a plan and knows all its weaknesses. And after barely dodging its attacks, he pulls out some water and spills it on the floor, as demons can't cross bodies of water no matter how small they are. And realizing what he did, the hellhound charged, then jumped at Bisher as to not touch the water, revealing its second weakness of opening their mouth while attacking. Bisher then throws one of the bloody beans in its mouth, as chocolate is very poisonous to dogs. Keep in mind that the bloody bean is 1,000 times more potent than a normal cocoa bean. And in a matter of seconds, the hellhound collapses on the floor from the poison. Bisher then finishes it off by hitting another weak point, which are its kidneys. And upon finishing the job, a blue aura rushes around him, which is basically XP, as the more demonic creatures he slays, the more stronger he'll become. He then wonders what Hugo's reaction would be when he finds out that an 8-year-old defeated a B+ monster. But before he can celebrate his victory, a pack of hellhounds suddenly appears. Bisher wondered if they showed up here because they heard the whimpers of their fallen brother. But nonetheless, he braced himself for battle. But suddenly, all of them start cowering in fear. Bisher wondered if his bloodlust scared them, but in reality, there was a huge Cerberus just standing behind him. And as Bisher stared at the demonic monstrosity, he wondered if he can take it down, just before noticing that it looks severely wounded. And realizing that it was probably hunted by the barbarian tribe that lives down the mountain, he decides to give it a shot, even if it's a level level A+ monster. And unbeknownst to everyone, Bisher had already reached level 3 Fang Mastery this time around at only 8 years old. He then dashes towards the monster and starts slashing and dodging its attacks at full speed. And upon pushing himself to the limits, Bisher was happy with doing this much damage to the beast. But no, he thought that he was doing damage to it. But in reality, the beast was just waiting for the perfect moment to strike. And seeing an opening, it smashes Bisher hard into a tree, knocking the daylights out of him for a couple of seconds. And as he wakes up, he couldn't feel his left arm for a second, making him think it got cut off. But thankfully, it was just injured, making him relieved that he bathed in the 60 River for that long. And admitting that there is no way in hell he could take this thing on in a 1v1. Bisher bolts away, barely dodging its attacks, and dashes towards the traps he'd been making all this time. And upon jumping the fence, Bisher spots the tree marking the trap, all while getting chased by that gigantic demon. He then jumps over the trap hole and almost gets his face chewed off. And after catching his breath, he stands up and welcomes the Cerberus to his little makeshift cradle of swords, saying that it wasn't really intended to catch a Cerberus, more like it was intended for hounds. But still, even after being punctured by spears coated with bloody bean paste, it still stood up and charged at him. Seeing this, Bisher throws a special kind of spear coated with red mamba venom he collected and kept from the snakes that attacked him when he was young. And sure enough, after taking 7 steps, the beast falls to the ground lifeless. Bisher then gets surprised at how much XP the beast gave him, and then wonders about how he'll transport the beast's giant corpse to the refs. But nonetheless, he remembers that a Cerberus is a guardian-type monster, only located where treasure resides. So with this knowledge, he covers himself with its scent, so other monsters won't attack him. Bisher then starts tracking its movements in the forest, and sure enough, he stumbles upon its home, which is an unexplored dungeon. And after getting a closer look, he remembers coming here, as this same dungeon will be discovered in 10 years and it will be empty. But judging from the smell of decay and mana, he was sure that no one has cleared it yet. And without a shred of hesitation, Bisher grins and starts clearing it. But a short while after, he spots some ruby vines and wonders if this dungeon is somehow connected to the ruby mine. But just then, a bright red light catches his attention, and it turns out to be the main room of the dungeon. Bisher is surprised that he didn't have to fight any monsters, but tosses the lack of monsters to the Cerberus guarding the place. But just then, his attention was grabbed by the red glowing orb alongside a skeleton laying on the floor. And seeing the pile of bones, Bisher realizes that he's not the first one to step foot in the dungeon, and the skeleton must be at least decades, if not centuries old. And judging from the wounds it sustained, he guessed the cause of death must have been getting slashed repeatedly with a sword. And after picking an old scrap of paper on the floor, Bisher recognized the penmanship as Baskervillian, and wondered if this person is from his clan. And sure enough, after reading the letter, he was right, as it stated that a long time ago, 2 brothers from the Baskerville clan tracked down this dungeon using ancient archives and legends, and have gone through godly trials and tribulations to fully clear it. But upon getting to the final room, they were met with a seemingly impossible riddle to crack. Bisher inspects the red ruby monolith and finds text stating that what entered was once 1, but within has become 2. Only 1 may leave. The person in the letter then stated that even after 3 years, they couldn't come up with an answer to the riddle, which seemed to surprise Bisher, as they really must have wanted the treasure inside and wondered just how valuable it is. The mysterious person continues stating the riddle consumed their minds, until one day they came to a dark conclusion. The 2 of them were twins, and so they were once 1 in their mother's womb, and once born they became 2. So hence, to leave the dungeon with its treasure, they must become 1 again, meaning only one of them can leave with the treasure. The brothers then engaged each other, and in the end, the writer ended up destroying his little brother. And to make matters even worse, nothing happened, as it was the wrong answer. And after weeks of insanity-inducing grief, he wrote this letter to warn anyone about the greed this dungeon inflicts upon you. But reading this, Bisher scoffs and tosses the piece of paper away, stating that the 2 of them were just unlucky because they were twins and got fixated on their answer, claiming that he's not a twin, but he still got the same riddle as them. And after reading the riddle a second time, he starts to really think about it, as no dungeon in the world is unbeatable. And after taking a good look at the shadowy skeleton, it clicked. What entered was once 1. This referred to his shadow as the dark entrance of the dungeon was devoid of light, and as he got closer to the main room, him and his shadow became two. So the answer to this riddle is his shadow. Bisher then shatters the glowing gem so that him and his shadow can become one again. And as a reward, the glowing shards morph into a demonic-looking blade with writing below it, stating that only the Baskerville bloodline could wield this sword. And after getting one glance at it, Bisher gets mortified as he recognized it as the relic of Beelzebub, one of the great 7 demons of the last ancient war. Bisher states that he remembers reading about this in his last life, as a few centuries ago the 7 calamities invaded the human world. So in order to stop them, the 7 great clans stepped up, with each taking on one, which ended in the Baskervilles taking on Beelzebub, who eventually defeated and sealed its remains somewhere unknown in their territory, causing all matter of demonic beasts to flock around it. He then remembers that in his past life, when the dungeon was discovered, it was empty, and realized that this sword probably ended up in the hands of the demons, causing thousands of casualties during the Demon War. But not this time. That won't happen, as the sword will be his now. Bisher then tries to pluck it from the ground, but suddenly it starts fusing with his arm and eventually manifested as an extension of his arm. And upon seeing his shiny new demonic sword, Bisher psychotically wondered just how strong he will actually get in this life. Alright, that's all for today. Don't forget to like and sub, as it really helps out. Part 2 should be coming out soon, if not already. But in the meantime, check out some of our other videos on screen. Thanks for watching.